Last summer was supposed to be the trip that brought my family closer together. Instead, it became the reason my 10-year-old son still refuses to sleep near windows. Even now, nearly a year later, he checks the locks on every door before bed. Sometimes twice, sometimes 3 times. And every so often, usually when the house is quiet and he thinks no one can hear him, he asks if I'm sure they can't find us again. I always tell him no. I always tell him we're safe. The truth is, I'm not entirely sure. It started when my wife, Emily, suggested we take a short vacation to the coast before school started back up. Nothing extravagant, just 4 nights somewhere quiet, a chance for our family to reset. Life had been chaotic for months. Work was brutal. Emily had been juggling 2 freelance contracts. Our daughter, Madison, had just turned 14 and was entering that delightful phase where every conversation somehow turned into an argument. And our son, Caleb, was caught in the middle of all of it. The kid had become withdrawn. Too much screen time, too much tension at home. We figured a few days near the ocean might do us all some good. Hotels in beach towns are outrageously expensive during summer, so Emily found a rental house through an online vacation platform. The property sat at the very end of a dead-end road in a small North Carolina beach town called Briar Point. It wasn't beachfront, but it was only a 5-minute walk from the shore. The listing showed a charming pale blue house with wraparound windows, a screened-in back deck, and a narrow creek running behind it that separated the property from a dense patch of marshland. It looked peaceful, private, perfect. We arrived on a Thursday afternoon. The drive had been exhausting, but the kids lit up the second they smelled the ocean air. Caleb practically launched himself out of the car before I'd even shifted into park. Madison, for once, actually smiled. By sunset, we were all down at the beach. Watching those two run through the surf together felt like stepping back in time. They laughed, actually laughed. No fighting, no complaining, just kids being kids. Emily squeezed my hand and smiled. This was a good idea. I agreed. At least then I did. The house itself was even nicer than the listing photos. Tucked against the tree line at the very edge of the street, it felt isolated in a way that was calming rather than eerie. Behind the backyard was the creek. Beyond that, a wall of twisted marsh grass and tall pines. The only neighboring houses were far enough away that you barely noticed them. Inside, everything was bright and airy. White walls, driftwood furniture, huge sliding glass doors that looked out over the yard. The kids claimed their rooms upstairs while Emily unpacked groceries she'd brought for dinners. That first night felt almost embarrassingly normal. Emily cooked shrimp pasta. I washed dishes. Then we all played cards at the dining table until nearly 11. By the time everyone headed to bed, I remember thinking this might be the most relaxed I'd felt in years. I slept hard. The next morning, Caleb looked terrible, pale, exhausted. He barely touched his pancakes. At first, Emily assumed he just stayed up reading comics under the blankets, but when I asked what was wrong, he wouldn't answer. He kept staring at the sliding glass doors. Finally, after enough prodding, he muttered something so quietly I almost didn't hear it. There were people outside my window. The room went silent. What kind of people? Emily asked. He shrugged. Shadow people. Madison rolled her eyes instantly. Oh my God. Madison, Emily snapped. Caleb looked close to tears. He explained that sometime during the night, he'd woken up and seen dark shapes moving across the backyard. At first, he thought they were just shadows from the trees. Then one of them stopped, turned toward his second-floor window, and waved. He said there were 3 of them, tall, dressed in black. They'd moved silently across the yard before disappearing into the marsh beyond the creek. I'll admit, the story unsettled me. Not because I believed in anything supernatural, because of how genuinely terrified he looked. This wasn't attention-seeking. The kid was shaken. Emily and I did what parents do. We reassured him, told him it was probably tree movement, moonlight, or even local teenagers messing around. Madison doubled down on the "you imagined it" angle, which earned her a glare from both of us. Eventually, Caleb nodded like he accepted our explanation, but I could tell he didn't. Neither did I. That day, we spent nearly 10 hours at the beach. By evening, Caleb seemed mostly back to normal. laughing, playing frisbee with me, splashing his sister in the shallows. Whatever he'd seen the night before seemed to fade with the daylight. When we returned to the house, though, something felt off immediately. The front door was unlocked. I distinctly remember locking it before we left. Emily insisted she might have forgotten to check it when we headed out. That was possible. She's absent-minded about that kind of thing. Still, it bothered me. I searched the house thoroughly. Nothing missing, nothing disturbed, no signs anyone had entered. I told myself to let it go. That night followed the same routine as the first. Dinner, games, a couple drinks after the kids went upstairs. Emily had just started telling me about a nightmare one of her clients was becoming when there was a soft knock on our bedroom door. Caleb stood there, shaking. His face was ghostly white. "They're back." The words barely came out. Emily sat up instantly. "What happened?" He swallowed hard. "One tapped on my window." A knot formed in my stomach. I followed him upstairs to his room. The second-floor window overlooked the backyard. At first glance, everything looked normal. Dark lawn, creek reflecting moonlight, marsh grass swaying faintly. Nothing there. Then I noticed the floodlight mounted above the deck was on, bright enough to wash half the yard in yellow light. Motion activated. Something had triggered it. "Where?" I asked. Caleb pointed toward the far edge of the yard near the creek. I stared for nearly a minute. Nothing. Then Caleb grabbed my arm hard enough to hurt. "There!" For a half second, I saw it. A shape, standing perfectly still near the tree line. Tall, black, human. And then it stepped backwards into darkness. Gone. Every instinct in my body screamed. I yanked the curtains shut. "What is it?" Emily called from the hallway. Before I could answer, Caleb whispered something that made every hair on my body stand up. It talked to me. I turned slowly. "What?" His lower lip trembled. "It said if I screamed, it would hurt all of you." The room seemed to tilt. What exactly did it say? Caleb's eyes filled with tears. "It said if I opened the back door, everyone would be okay." My blood went cold. This wasn't imagination. This wasn't shadows. Someone had been outside my son's window, talking to him, and somehow they expected him to let them inside. That was the moment I realized our family vacation had become something entirely else. Something far darker. And outside, beyond the dunes and marsh grass, I had the unmistakable feeling that someone was still watching. I didn't sleep that night. Not even for a second. After hearing what Caleb told me, I checked every lock in that house twice. Then I checked them again. The front door, the side entrance off the laundry room, every downstairs window, the sliding glass doors facing the backyard. Everything was secure, at least physically. That did nothing to calm the unease creeping through me. Emily could tell something was wrong the moment I came downstairs. I told her what Caleb had said, word for word. The color drained from her face. "Do you think he made it up?" I wanted to say yes. I wanted to laugh it off and blame it on an overactive imagination fed by too much beach town ghost story nonsense. But I couldn't. Not after what I'd seen standing at the edge of the yard, and not after the way Caleb had looked when he said it. Pure terror, the kind a child can't fake. That night, we moved both kids into the living room. I framed it like some spontaneous family adventure, a vacation campout. Blankets on the floor, pillows everywhere, movies until everyone fell asleep. Madison thought it was ridiculous, but played along. Caleb looked relieved enough that he nearly cried. We stayed up watching some animated movie I barely paid attention to. My focus stayed fixed on the glass doors, on the dark yard beyond them. Around midnight, everyone finally drifted off. Emily curled against my shoulder, Madison half buried under blankets, Caleb pressed close beside me like he had when he was little. I sat there awake, staring into darkness, listening, waiting. At some point, exhaustion must have won because the next thing I remember was Caleb shaking me violently. "Dad," his voice croaked. "Dad, they're here." I shot upright. The digital clock on the cable box glowed 2:37 a.m. For half a second, I didn't understand. Then I followed his trembling finger towards the sliding glass doors and saw them. 3 figures stood motionless on the deck, all dressed in black. Tall hooded sweatshirts, black gloves, their faces hidden behind smooth white masks. The masks were grotesque, featureless except for oversized round eye holes that made them look insect-like. One tilted its head slowly, almost curiously, as if studying us. Emily gasped, awake beside me. Madison let out a sharp scream, and suddenly all 3 figures rushed the glass at once. The impact rattled the entire doorframe. Caleb shrieked. I shoved everyone backward and grabbed the first thing within reach, a heavy wooden fireplace poker. The figures began yanking violently on the door handle. Thank God I'd locked it. One of them slammed both fists against the glass, again, testing it. The middle figure reached into his hoodie and pulled out something metallic, a knife. Even from several feet away, I could see the blade catch moonlight. "Call 911, I shouted. Madison, somehow keeping her head better than any of us, snatched Emily's phone from the coffee table. Her fingers flew across the screen. Outside, the masked men seemed to enjoy our panic. One dragged the knife slowly across the glass, producing a high screech that made my skin crawl. Another raised both hands and waved mockingly. The third simply stared, still, watching, like this was entertainment. I moved in front of my family, gripping the poker so tightly my knuckles burned. I knew it was useless if they got through. 3 grown men against one terrified father holding decorative iron. But instinct doesn't care about logic. It only cares about standing between danger and the people you love. The man with the knife pointed directly at Caleb, then made a beckoning gesture. "Come here." My son buried his face into Emily's shoulder. Rage flooded through me so intensely it overpowered fear. I charged the door and slammed the poker against the glass. "Get away from my family." The men jerked back. Not from fear, from surprise. Then one laughed. Even through the glass, I heard it. A low, ugly sound. That was when red and blue lights exploded across the backyard. For a moment, nobody moved. Then chaos erupted. A police cruiser came tearing across the side yard from the neighboring property, tires ripping through wet grass. Before I could process what was happening, an officer tackled the nearest masked figure off the deck. The other 2 bolted. One made it maybe 20 feet before another officer dropped him hard near the creek bank. The third tried vaulting the deck railing. A K unit hit him before he landed. The whole thing happened in seconds. One moment our family was cornered. The next, our attackers were face down in the mud with officers shouting commands. I just stood there shaking. The poker slipped from my hands and clattered onto the floor. Emily was sobbing. Madison clutched Caleb so tightly he could barely breathe. When officers finally came to the door, I could barely unlock it. The lead officer, a broad man named Sergeant Willis, stepped inside and immediately asked if we were hurt. We weren't, physically. He nodded grimly. Then he explained something that made my blood run cold. The police had already been watching the property. Apparently, several vacationers in Briar Point had reported suspicious incidents over the past 2 months. Masked figures appearing outside rental homes, late-night prowling, attempts to lure occupants outdoors. One family reported hearing whispers outside their children's bedroom windows. Another discovered muddy footprints leading up to their back deck. Local law enforcement suspected a group of local men was targeting tourists, especially families. They believed the men chose vacation rentals because occupants were unfamiliar with the area, less prepared, and often carried cash, electronics, and valuables. Our son's reports likely saved us. When Emily mentioned his ghost story to the rental company manager earlier that afternoon while asking about floodlight settings, the manager contacted police.
Thankfully, the department had already flagged this address after another complaint 2 weeks earlier. They'd quietly stationed surveillance nearby. If not for that, the officers admitted response time would have been at least 15 minutes, long enough for things to become catastrophic. The 3 men were local, ages 19, 20, and 21. No criminal records beyond minor vandalism and petty theft. Normal looking. Ordinary. That somehow made it worse. There's something deeply unsettling about evil wearing an average face. Police recovered knives from all 3, zip ties, crowbar, and duct tape. I don't allow myself to think too much about what they intended. The official report classified it as attempted armed burglary, but Sergeant Willis looked me dead in the eye and said quietly, "You're lucky your boy spoke up." We left Briar Point before sunrise, didn't pack neatly, didn't clean up, just threw everything into the SUV and drove. The rental company refunded every cent and offered free future stays, as if we'd ever go back. We never returned to that beach. Never will. For months afterwards, Caleb refused to sleep alone. He'd wake screaming from nightmares about white-eyed faces pressed against windows. Madison stopped mocking his story after that. She became fiercely protective of him after that. Emily still checks every lock before bed. And me? I installed motion lights around our house, security cameras, reinforced deadbolts. Things I once considered paranoid, because now I understand something I wish I didn't. Monsters are real. They don't live under beds. They don't haunt old graveyards. They don't need supernatural powers. Sometimes they wear hoodies. Sometimes they smile like ordinary people. And sometimes they wait just beyond the glass, hoping someone is foolish enough to open the door.
I've always been the kind of person who trusts too easily. My girlfriend, Vanessa, never lets me forget it. She says I treat strangers like old friends within 5 minutes of meeting them, which honestly, she's not wrong about. I just assume people are good until they prove otherwise. That mindset almost got us into serious trouble last summer. We went to Ocean City, Maryland for our first real trip together. Not a family thing, not a group thing, just the 2 of us trying to do the whole couple vacation experience properly. Ocean City is one of those places that looks perfect on the surface. Bright boardwalk, crowded beaches, endless food stands, music everywhere. It feels safe because it's always full of people. We rented a condo a few blocks from the beach. 5th floor, ocean view, balcony overlooking the water. Vanessa loved it immediately. I could tell she was already planning our mornings with coffee outside and slow beach walks. The first red flag showed up before we even got there. At a gas station about 20 minutes from the condo, I bumped into a guy while grabbing snacks. He turned around immediately. All apologies. "Oh man, I'm so sorry. That was my fault." He had this easy smile, late 20s, maybe early 30s, button-up shirt, slightly open collar, like he was trying a bit too hard to look relaxed. We started talking while waiting in line. His name was Henry, and he had that strange kind of charm where he made everything feel casual within seconds. When I told him we were headed to Ocean City, his eyes lit up. No way, me too. That alone felt like coincidence, but what really got me was how quickly he tried to connect. "What condo you staying at?" I told him. He nodded like it meant something. "I think I know that building. My girl and I are probably close by." That phrase stuck with me later. My girl. He said it like they were a pair that always moved together. He asked for my number before we left. I gave it to him without thinking. Vanessa rolled her eyes the moment I got back in the car. "I made a friend," I said. "I can tell," she replied without looking up. She wasn't impressed. At the time, I didn't care. We checked into the condo that afternoon. It was perfect. Clean, modern, glass balcony doors opening right to the ocean breeze. Vanessa spent most of the evening unpacking while I stood outside watching the waves. That night was peaceful, almost too peaceful, the kind where you forget you're renting a space. We fell asleep early, or at least Vanessa did. I stayed up a little longer watching TV in the living room. Around 11:30, something interrupted me. The doorbell rang.
I paused the movie, listened. Nothing. Then it rang again, sharp, clear, not a dream. I stood up slowly, confused, and walked toward the door. Another ring, then another. Vanessa stirred in the bedroom. "What is that?" she called out. "I don't know." By the fourth ring, I opened the front window slightly and looked outside. A man stood there, slim build, head slightly down, holding a brown paper bag in both hands. I assumed it was a delivery mistake. I opened the door just enough to speak through the security screen. "You've got the wrong place," I said. He didn't respond immediately. Then, in a flat voice, "I have your pizza." I looked at the bag. No logo, no box, just folded paper. "I didn't order anything," I said. He didn't move. "I have your pizza," he repeated. Same tone, same wording, like a recording stuck on loop. I closed the door, locked it, walked back toward the living room. The doorbell rang again, immediately. Vanessa was now fully awake. "Who is it?" "Wrong delivery," I said. Probably just confused. But something about his voice didn't sit right. It wasn't angry, it wasn't nervous, it was empty. The doorbell rang again, and again. I opened the door a second time, more annoyed than cautious. Before I could say anything, he repeated it. "I have your pizza." "That's not mine, you need to leave." He tilted his head slightly, then said our exact address, word for word. My stomach tightened. "How do you know that?" I asked. No answer. Then his hand moved, slowly reaching toward the screen door handle. That's when I snapped. I slammed the door shut and locked it. "This is ridiculous," I muttered. I checked the lock twice, then again. When I peeked through the window, he was gone. A red car sat at the curb instead. Old, beat up, one headlight broken, engine still running, keys still in the ignition. I stepped back immediately. "Okay," I said under my breath. "That's weird." I ran back inside and locked everything. Deadbolt, chain, everything. Vanessa didn't sleep much that night. Neither did I. Around 4 a.m., I finally decided to check the street again from the upstairs window. The car was still there. Then, after a few minutes, it wasn't. No sound, no movement. Just gone. We tried to sleep after that. We almost succeeded. Almost. Because the next morning, things got worse. And that's when I realized Henry was never just randomly passing through Ocean City. He was already there, waiting. The next morning, Vanessa woke up earlier than I did. She was already sitting on the edge of the bed when I opened my eyes. "I don't think that was random," she said. I knew what she meant immediately. Still, I tried to shrug it off. "Probably just a delivery driver messing around," I said. But even as I said it, it didn't sound convincing. We spent the morning at the beach anyway, trying to force normalcy back into the trip. Vanessa barely relaxed. She kept looking back toward the boardwalk every few minutes like she expected someone to appear. Around midday, I got a message. Unknown number. "Hey buddy, let's grab a drink today. I'm nearby." No name, no context needed. It was Henry. I showed it to Vanessa. She didn't even hesitate. Block him. I told her I would, but I didn't immediately. Something about it made me uneasy in a different way now. It didn't feel like friendly persistence anymore. It felt like someone who already knew more than they should. We left the beach early that day. Vanessa was done pretending this was normal. On the walk back, I checked my phone again. Another message came through. "Don't go to your room yet." I stopped walking. Vanessa noticed instantly. "What is it?" I showed her. Her face changed. "Okay," she said quietly. "Now we call the police." We did. Or tried to. But by the time we reached the condo building, something was already wrong. The front door. It was slightly open. Just a few inches. I knew for a fact I locked it. Vanessa stopped behind me. "Nope," she said. "Nope. Call them now." I pushed the door open carefully. Inside, everything looked normal at first glance. Too normal. That's what made it worse. We stepped in slowly, The living room was untouched. Kitchen, fine. But then I noticed the bedroom door was open. We hadn't left it that way. I walked in. Vanessa stayed behind me. And that's when I saw it. The balcony door, wide open. Curtains moving slightly in the breeze. I checked the room quickly. Nothing obvious stolen, but then I opened the closet. Our bags were on the floor, completely dumped out, zippers open, clothes scattered. Vanessa's voice shook behind me. "What's missing?" I checked. My shoes, a pair of expensive sneakers, Vanessa's swimsuit, and a printed photo we had left on the dresser. That last part made no sense. Who steals a photo? That's when the fear stopped feeling abstract. It became personal. We called the police immediately. While waiting, I kept thinking about the message. Don't go to your room yet. He didn't say don't go back. He said don't go yet, like he knew we were already on our way. The officers arrived about 20 minutes later. We explained everything. The gas station meeting, the repeated visits, the pizza guy, the car, the messages. They checked nearby condos. No Henry listed anywhere. No Sarah either. No one matching them had officially checked into the building. One officer looked at me carefully. "Are you sure they gave real names?" That question hit harder than anything else, because I wasn't sure anymore. They checked security footage, but the hallway camera on our floor had a blind spot near our door, just enough to miss whoever had been there. The police suggested it was likely a burglary attempt targeting tourists. A quick in-and-out theft. Nothing organized, nothing targeted. But that didn't explain the messages, or the timing, or how someone knew exactly when we'd leave, or how they got inside without forcing the door. That part they didn't have an answer for. Before leaving, one officer gave us advice I still remember. Sometimes people don't break in like in movies. They just wait for mistakes. That night, we stayed in a hotel. We didn't go back to the condo. We didn't even collect all our things immediately. We left fast. Vanessa didn't speak much on the drive home. At one point, she just said, "That wasn't random," and I didn't argue anymore. A few weeks later, curiosity got the better of me. I looked up the condo again. The listing was gone, completely removed. No rental history available anymore. No reviews, no trace. Just gone from the platform like it had never existed. That detail unsettled me more than anything else, because it meant someone had either taken it down or never wanted it there long enough to be remembered. I never heard from Henry again. No more messages, no calls, nothing. But sometimes when Vanessa and I talk about it, we both agree on one thing we can't explain away. He never asked for anything directly, not once. No money, no valuables, no threats. Just access, time, proximity. And that line he sent still sticks in my head more than anything else. Don't go to your room yet. Because the way he said it, it didn't sound like a warning. It sounded like he already knew what was waiting there before we did.